Hello and welcome to another pizza-filling and wet-willying episode of What Happened, the YouTube-style pop culture media show that regularly travels back to the past to bring up stuff that's neither bodacious nor bossa nova.
Chevy Nova?
And when you're talking about stuff that's better left forgotten in the past, there's perhaps no finer example than the third motion picture adaptation of the legendary Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or Heroes for all my UK fans out there. Well, it's been well documented that this piece of media was, and still is, not highly regarded in pretty much every circle. There are indeed several concrete factors into why that is. TMNT burnout, reduced budget, poor timing, and going all in on a wacky story gimmick that many fans didn't appreciate. So grab your sais, swords, bow staffs, and nunchucks, or grappling hooks for all my UK fans out there, as I answer the question, what happened to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3?
Help, I'm a turtle and I can't get up.
It's no secret that by late 1992, turtle power was diminishing somewhat in the eyes of the fickle 6 to 12-year-old demographic, which isn't surprising given they, by that time, had been subjected to 142 episodes of TV, 2 films, several comic book lines, hundreds of action figures, and a bunch of different video games. So, noticing the decline in viewership and sales across the board amongst all its merchandising, Mirage Studios, Playmates, and Konami launched one more massive push for the Turtles that lasted until about the end of 1993, a strategy which of course makes a ton of sense. If fans are burned out by your product, then you logically need to pump out even more, not stopping for any reason. This pumping out of said product gave us 3 different versions of a fighting game, even more waves of weird-ass action figures, and a bunch of fresh storylines in the comic books. Of course, a new live-action movie was going to be considered the crown jewel, but even with all the problems it wound up having, an over-reliance on juvenile humor, lack of fan-favorite characters, less fighting scenes, and poor production values, its main issue traces back to one particular decision. The creators of TMNT, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, noticed that the rehashing of these same characters and storylines was quickly wearing thin, so they were looking to introduce fresher concepts that could shake things up. Part of this reasoning was due to their displeasure with the second movie, Secret of the Ooze, which they were reportedly quite displeased with when it released in theaters less than a year after the Turtles' first breakout cinematic hit. In a 2012 interview with Sci-Fi Now magazine, Peter Laird said, "The first movie had been a huge success, and at the time it had grossed something like $135 million. I visited the set of the second movie around the time they started filming and was distressed by the apparent cheesiness of the sets, and I saw the goofy take on the Turtles this movie seemed to have. I went out to dinner with a few of the producers who started talking about all the ways the first movie had gone wrong and how they're going to fix those problems with the second movie. Stuff like how it was too dark, too violent, the actress playing April O'Neil didn't test well with young boys, etc. I pointed out that the first movie had cost something like $15 million to make and had, at that point, already brought in $135 million. What was the problem? What exactly needed to be fixed? So the TMNT creators were going to be a bit hesitant about a third motion picture. Now, whenever I cover the behind-the-scenes details of a major film, the budget is typically one of, if not the biggest factor that affects the end result, and that's certainly the case with Ninja Turtles 3. Eastman and Laird knew by then that the cyclical nature of a big franchise meant there were going to be peaks and valleys, and that the Turtles, at least from a mainstream entertainment point of view, look like they're heading towards one of those valleys. But the main financier of the films and legend of Hong Kong cinema, Golden Harvest, also noticed this downward trend and very much decided to stand on business. As Laird pointed out, the first film did absolute gangbusters, generating well over $100 million on a budget of $13, making it one of the most profitable movies of all time. However, those profits started to get a bit goopy with Secret of the Ooze, which despite having a bigger budget at $25 million, brought in only $75, meaning the Turtles were already dishing out diminishing returns. Golden Harvest then correctly assumed that even less money would be made the third time around, and therefore denied any sort of increase to the budget, and in fact reduced it down to $21 million, which meant that before the cameras even began rolling, the Turtles were going to be in for a very, very rough fight.
This is very bad.
The writer of the first two films, Todd W. Langan, was not brought back for whatever reason, possibly in a cost-cutting measure, so instead, Golden Harvest approached one Stuart Gillard to helm the project. Why? Well, literally because he happened to be in the right place at the right time. Anyway, Gillard, a Canadian writer, director, actor triple threat, didn't have many notable credits on his resume in the early 90s, but since he had writing experience, it seemed Golden Harvest thought it would save some time by having him on double duty. In an interview on the Turtle Tracks podcast, Gillard enthusiastically recounted his time developing the film, which, according to him, kicked off a very interesting chain of events. He had already seen the previous two cinematic entries, and while he had enjoyed both, his original intention was to take it back to the darker, grittier style that the original had established back in 1990. This seemed to please Golden Harvest producers at first, but the task of convincing Eastman and Laird was left to him, which wasn't exactly a painless process. According to Gillard, the creators of the Turtles had final story approval, meaning the general premise and the major beats of the movie had to go through them before the actual script and filming could officially start. It took several months and 3 separate trips to Mirage Studios before Gillard pitched an idea they all finally agreed upon, after having gone through, plenty of rejections. One such rejection that Gillard recalled in that same Turtle Tracks interview was a story featuring our teenage heroes embarking on a sunny Floridian adventure with a pro-ecological message, which sounds not too dissimilar from the beginning bit of the Manhattan Project, funnily enough. But it was during Gillard's third trip to Mirage where Eastman and Laird remarked that they very much enjoyed time travel stories, to which Stuart Gillard agreed and immediately pitched one where the Turtles would have to travel back to ancient Japan and presumably get up to some form of samurai-based hijinks, despite the fact they were trained in ninjutsu. Anyway, Eastman and Laird instantly gravitated towards this premise, and according to Stewart, also gravitated towards not including any more cartoon-adjacent mutant characters, as they very much wanted to steer clear of the same goofy tone from Secret of the Ooze, which was something they really didn't accomplish.
It's Wet Willy time!
This plot would certainly play into Eastman and Laird's desire to present different stories, especially since Shredder, or Kevin Nash, was definitively killed in the last movie, after definitively being killed in the first one. Now, here is where things get interesting. It's been known for decades now that in the early 90s, there were several stories featuring the fearsome fighting teams going back to feudal Japan in what looked like a coordinated marketing effort. This kicked off in March of 1992 in the Mirage comics, where the Time Mistress Renette, whom you can tell is a Time Mistress due to all the clocks, sends the Turtles back to glorious Nippon to fight a nefarious new villain. She does this via the magical MacGuffin you see right here. Now, according to Stuart Gillard, he had no clue that other really similar stories were happening in other Ninja Turtle media, which included the cartoon with a September 1993 episode called The Legend of Koji. Gillard maintained that it was him that came up with the concept of the Time Scepter when he was fleshing out the script, as he wanted a way for the Turtles and 4 ancient samurai to suddenly swap places. So one of two things happened here. One, it was indeed the film that inspired the creation of the entire Ancient Japan trilogy, and since producing a comic book takes way less time than a feature film or cartoon, Eastman and Laird just ran with the idea, with the comic book version coming out first. The other possible theory is that Eastman and Laird were already thinking of a time-traveling storyline, and subtly started to push Gillard into going into that direction. It just all depends on when these conversations took place, but Gillard didn't provide an exact timeline. Regardless, the idea of focusing on time travel, especially to an exotic location, isn't exactly budget-friendly. So instead of having cool stuff like a dinosaur samurai, time witches, and mystical dragons, the idea had to be more grounded and certainly more frugal. This, of course, is why good old April O'Neil just stumbles upon the time scepter after a particularly fruitful day of thrifting, instead of it being bestowed by Renette or done through the technological machinations of Shredder. As for feudal Japan, well, the producers looked at the shooting schedule, the budget, and then set sail for Astoria, Oregon, a decision which definitely shaved a few million off the budget. What didn't save money, though, was that after the construction of a large-scale Japanese-style village in the foothills of Astoria, the inclement weather destroyed half the entire set after a particularly nasty rainstorm, costing the production both time and money. And while that's certainly regrettable, there is something that the smaller budget affected more than just a damaged set, and that is, of course, the waking nightmare that were the turtles themselves.
What? Bingo!
Oh, yes!
Yes!
Oh, Oxford is over!
Now, while plenty of fans have criticized the more kid-friendly designs of Raph, Leo, Mikey, and Donnie in the second film, they were at least of the same high quality expected from Jim Henson's Creature Shop. The same cannot be said of the weirdos that were featured in Turtles 3, as the production and design of the suits moved from the Creature Shop to All Effects Company, whom you will not remember from their work on the Energizer Bunny. To be fair, they also created Johnny Five from Short Circuit, but that was very clearly a robotic-looking robot, and to bring the Turtles to life, it would require a lot more sophistication, which, as we can see, was more than a bit lacking. And this inexperience with the suit design affected not just the Toidles, but their beloved master as well. Splinter, while having never been the most mobile character going by the other movies, at least did more than just pop up in windowsills and make lame jokes. And I'll be as respectful as I can here, but, visually, he didn't have the same appeal as he did in his previous appearances.
He looks like fucking roadkill.
So, while it doesn't need to be said, I'll say it anyway. When your big selling point, your main characters all look like this, the problems with your film are gonna be pretty constant, so the rest of the material better be top shelf stuff to make up the difference. Now, given the amount of times I've already referenced Wet Willy time, well, that should be pretty indicative that the material was indeed not top shelf.
You were expecting maybe the Addams Family?
Good one.
In the Turtle Tracks interview, Stuart Gillard explained how there was definitely some trepidation about his first draft, as Eastman and Laird decided to hire uncredited screenwriter Robert McGee to do a passover on the script, making various notes and changes along the way. Then, sometime after that pass was completed, Golden Harvest, in a completely separate deal, hired Robert McGee again to give even further notes, with Gillard pointing out that this second pass often contradicted the changes from the first. As you can surmise, during this whole process, the concept of that grittier version of the Turtles began to fall by the wayside, as someone, I assume a producer, started to second guess that angle and mandated that more quote-unquote comedy should be added. This was further confirmed by Michelangelo voice actor Robbie Rist, who, when asked about the third movie by the TMNT fan page in 2013, revealed the following. The Turtles movie that everyone hates is the third movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, but I have a huge soft spot in my heart for it. They asked me to help punch up Turtles 3. They came to me and told me that some of the dialogue wasn't very good, so they asked me to punch it up. My favorite line that I came up with in Turtles 3 is, "Oh, he who dings the shell must pay." I still say it sometimes. There were a bunch of jokes in that third movie that I came up with. Of course, my jokes had to be in a movie that everyone hates.
I don't think I'll ever laugh again.
Man, considering what we got in the final finished product, I would have absolutely hated to see the version of the movie before these, again, quote-unquote, punch-ups. After filming was complete and the first cut was in the can, Golden Harvest and New Line Cinema decided that maybe they wouldn't pre-screen this one for critics, to make sure that no spoilers would leak ahead of the big premiere. That tactic didn't really help matters much though. The idea of the Turtles going back in time only generated $54 million during its entire worldwide run. Speaking of Turtles in Time, it's still a mystery as to how or why the subtitle of the arcade and SNES game was eventually tacked onto Turtles 3 in later DVD printings, as even Stuart Gillard confirmed that was never a part of his working scripts and was unaware it had even happened in the subsequent years after the movie's release. Nevertheless, to this day, Kevin Eastman has proclaimed that of the original 3 live-action films, Turtles 3 is his second favorite behind the first, which is, curious to say the least, but I think we can chalk that up to the fact that he and Peter Laird had a bit more oversight into its creation. To 99% of fans though, it's generally considered far cheesier and less action-packed than the first two. Vanilla Ice notwithstanding, with the only real remnants of that darker throwback to the first movie being the inclusion of Casey Jones, and that the Turtles used their weapons a bit more than they did in Secret of the Ooze. Even more mystifying than all that, despite the much lower box office and scathing reviews, it is in fact at the very bottom of all cinematic Turtle adaptations. A fourth movie, for a while at least, was being considered, but never got out of the concept phase. However, various bits of what it would have centered around eventually splintered off into other forms of Turtle media. For example, its working title, The Next Mutation, and the inclusion of a fifth turtle, Kirby, transferred over to the depressingly bad live-action TV series, with Kirby eventually being dropped for Venus de Milo. The entire concept of the Turtles transforming into more violent, brutish forms, which was supposed to be the main plotline, then found its way into the original cartoon series during its 9th season, which barely anybody was watching by that point in time. And while turtle burnout was a very real thing and the property did indeed slowly fade away during the tail end of the 90s, at the end of the day it was still too big of a franchise to fail completely, as it had a solid 5 years of maintaining an absolute chokehold on the cartoon and action figure markets. So with that kind of history, the 2003 reboot series was able to revitalize the property with new action figures, video games, and the eventual greenlight of the 2007 CGI film TMNT, which acted as a soft sequel to their previous live-action adventures. But it still makes you wonder what might have happened if things had just been a bit different, if instead of Japan, Ninja Turtles 3 had taken place in NYC or, I don't know, Dimension X, and had featured the likes of Krang or a certain Rhino and Warthog. If they had been able to pull that off, even decently, we might have wound up with a much more solid trilogy of films. But in retrospect, we got away rather lightly compared to the later and much less radical interpretations of the heroes in the half shell. And if you know of any other righteous, eclectic, or gnarly stories in the video game or movie industries, shout them out in the comments below or enter the cozy turtle den that is my social media. See you next time, dudes, and thanks for watching!